Imagine a woman going through a field of flowers in Switzerland with her hair down, majestically lying in the lilacs. This is my friend Zandi. And I would like to welcome her onto the podcast.
Raymond, thank you so much. First of all, I've never heard myself described that way or even thought about being described that way, but I'm touched and I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. And today on this episode, we're going to be talking about practical methods of coping and a little unorthodox ones as well. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your self-love, self-discovery journey and how you came about all of these methods?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I went through a lot of stuff in my teenage years and my early 20s too that was really difficult, simply put. I had a lot of health issues. I was dealing with grief. I also was facing a couple other different traumas, and one thing led to another. I took time off school for everything, and I realized eventually that how I was dealing with stress in my life and the things I had faced was not efficacious. It was not working. So I really, kind of out of necessity, had to learn how to heal myself and develop better coping strategies for what I was facing. And also, I was just in such an intense state of distress that I felt I had no other option but to look into alternate healing, holistic health, and different kind of modalities of ensuring that I was well and ensuring that I was healthy, not just on a physical level, but also on a spiritual level. And for me personally, that was the biggest factor, contributing to my journey, because I've always been a very spiritual person. Ever since I was very little, I had very strong belief in some greater intelligence or in some greater force, universal life force. And I don't subscribe to a particular religion, but I had this understanding eventually that if everything is created in the image of divinity, and if I'm included in creation, then it's really important that I respect creation, and by extension, I respect myself. So
that's amazing.
Kind of how I got onto this path. And I also want to emphasize that I'm still learning. I feel like one of my struggles when I was originally looking into different healing paths and methods was that I felt like a lot of influencers online and even authors that I read presented their work as if it were completely devoid of flaw, and as if they were completely devoid of flaw.
Exactly.
And I felt quite frustrated because I wanted to improve myself so badly, and I felt like I was surrounded by all of this self-righteous content. I wanted someone who had, or I wanted to hear from someone who had genuine experience with healing. So I want to emphasize there are still things I'm very much working on, and I've taken many years to kind of learn more about these types of subjects. But yeah, that's a little bit about what got me started on the trajectory.
Wow, that's great. I think that's another reason why I started the podcast, is what you were talking about. I was looking online, and it was these sort of self-righteous creators who were I have it all figured out.
Right.
I'm totally okay. This is all in my past, and I'm a completely healed 100% person. And that's just not how healing works, and that's just not how self-love works. It's something you have to continuously try to build upon. And as new challenges come in your life, you have to build new coping mechanisms. And I think that was something I really struggled with. After I went to therapy, I was okay, I feel like I've learned them all. But every time a new challenge comes, I'm I don't think I'm prepared for this sort of situation. And so I think it's good to emphasize that self-love and self-healing is a continuous learning journey, and it might push you to learning some unorthodox methods and trying to some new things.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I also feel in my experience, when I was originally trying to learn more about how to take care of myself and how to explore different healing options, when I would Google how to practice self-love, how to heal, every result was so generic, and I was how do I apply this to my life? Without fail, results would be show compassion to yourself, be gentle to yourself, forgive yourself, which is all very well and true and fantastic advice, but it's so broad, and I felt like I needed to know really practical applications of these precepts, kind of. So that's where my deep diving began. Exactly.
So what are some of your favorite methods of coping?
Oh, one of my favorite questions of all time. All right. So first of all, every morning I journal by hand, manually. Like, for me, there's something very valuable about actually writing out and engaging like my muscles in a way that involves pen and paper, not screen, because I'm typing very much like throughout the day.
Yeah, for school.
And exactly. And it's really important to me that I kind of disrupt that pathway immediately upon waking up. So I journal. And I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, which is also very important to me because some people have, whatever you want to call it, like the willpower, self-control to avoid like thinking about notifications if their phone isn't on Do Not Disturb, but I'm not one of those people, and I really need to like have complete silence from my electronics while I'm doing this. So I journal every day for 20 minutes with my phone on Do Not Disturb, and while I'm journaling, I listen to very specific frequency music on Spotify, and one of the primary tools I use is sound, which might sound kind of interesting, but there's actually a lot of research on the healing properties of various frequencies and their effects on the body and on the electromagnetic field of the body. So when I listen to music when I journal, I have a list for particular frequencies I listen to.
And we'll also include it in the on the website, so you can see all of the links to the sounds she listens to.
Yeah, so these are all on Spotify. But I listen to Music, Body, and Spirit 852 Hertz Love Frequency. There's an entire playlist that I think is about 35 minutes that I listen to very much. There's also a playlist by a creator called Hertz HZ Frequency Zone. And this playlist is called Healed Damage in the Body 288 Hertz Instant Healing. I also listen to 741 Hertz Full Body Detox by Miracle Tones and 444 Hertz Healing Frequency, which is an album by Emiliano Bruguera. So these are kind of the different options that I cycle through. And some people might be wondering what I journal about. Like, I journal.
Yeah,
but
like what prompts, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So my prompt changes, but it really changes depending on my mood. Generally, I'm trying to simply observe my thoughts. I think that's the most simple way that I can kind of like distill my prompt into one sentence. Personally, I am like a chronic overthinker. I have I'm extremely susceptible to racing thoughts, to being trapped in my thoughts, to overthinking, to worrying. Worrying in and of itself, honestly, is not even an issue unless we assign judgment to that. But
that's very fair.
My issue is excessive worrying. Like worrying to a point where not only am I assigning judgment to the worry, but I'm also like doing it to such a degree that it interferes with my other tasks. So my struggle is to control my mind and to control my thoughts. So what I do when I journal is that I literally write down my thoughts. I don't engage with them. I don't evaluate them. I simply let them exist on the paper. I kind of allow them to exit from my mind and into, I guess, material reality on the page, right? And in addition to that, sometimes I will observe my external reality, right? So I will document my internal reality, my thoughts, but also my external reality. So, for example, like observing the color of the room that I'm in, observing the texture of the floor, various like grounding exercises that really get me out of my mind and into physical space.
When I was in therapy, actually, we used to do like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, like 5 things you touch. It's like you assign it to all your 5 senses. And I think that is such a good grounding technique. I also, if I'm having like sort of like panic, I take like my fist and I like rub it on my chest, and it like really helps with like grounding. We used to do a lot of sensory stuff, so if you were feeling overwhelmed, grabbing something cold and just like holding it just takes you out of your thoughts.
Yes, that is so, Raven, that's so true. And I'm so glad you said that, because that's actually really related to another one of my practices, which is about regulating the vagus nerve. So this is cranial nerve 10. It extends kind of from above the ear, down the neck, throughout the body, and it regulates parasympathetic nervous system. So it's really related to relaxation response, and there are actually several ways to like hack, quote unquote, your body to activate the vagus nerve, and one of them completely relates to cold exposure, like you were saying. So one thing that I learned in my healing journey was that like mammals are equipped with something called the diver reflex, the mammalian diver reflex, which I had never heard about until like 3 years ago. When mammals are exposed to cold temperatures, and like particularly on the face, and when the head is below the heart rate decreases by like upwards of 30%. Blood pressure lowers. It's an astounding reflex, and it has so many healing properties. And so I try many days. One way that's very practical to like activate this reflex is just to have a cup, or not a cup, I guess like a bowl of cold water, and simply to put one's head in the bowl of cold water for like 30 seconds, even 20 seconds is totally fine. But this has like extended, prolonged health benefits for both mental and physical health. And also, like, in terms of other ways of activating the vagus nerve, there is a technique called emotional freedom tapping, which reminds me of what you're saying, Raven, about putting your hand, like, near your chest. If you tap your chest,
I used to do this with my therapist. I had, like, an alternative therapist. She used to do Reiki healing and,
that's amazing.
Yeah, like, a lot of that sort of stuff. Yeah, she used to do the tapping.
Yes. There are various pressure points on the body when tapped that will activate like many emotional regulation responses, relaxation responses. So this is definitely another thing that I try to incorporate into my daily life, like even in very small moments in which I feel stressed, in which I'm overthinking, in which I'm like assigning a lot of meaning to my pain or suffering. I will like tap, for example, the side of my head, the top of my head, my neck, my throat. Like these are completely accessible, like at any moment in time.
Exactly.
And that's why I think that these mechanisms are really good to rely on. And in addition to like emotional freedom tapping, something that I personally implement in my life is acupuncture practice. This was something that was actually, I would say, one of the most effective medicinal practices for healing some of my own health issues that I was facing at the time. And I personally did not know anyone who had done acupuncture. I was very unfamiliar with acupuncture, but I started researching what acupuncture was, if anyone near me or like anyone in my area practiced it and was covered by my insurance, which actually was the case.
Really?
Like, incredibly, which was something I was not expecting.
I didn't know that could be covered by insurance.
I didn't either, and I feel like that's something that I really want to emphasize to whoever's listening. Acupuncture is not necessarily like this obsolete practice. It's recognized medically and covered by many. Personally, I have Cigna, and Cigna does cover many acupuncturists, at least in the Baltimore area. So I go weekly to acupuncture, and this has really honestly healed a lot of facets of my physical health, my mood. It's also like a very conducive time for me to meditate. That's another like very practical thing I do every day. I meditate without fail, or I try without fail, for 30 minutes every day, because this is one of the only things that like really consistently regulates my mood. I have like very intense insomnia. I have since I was a child. My sleep is extremely interrupted. It's hard for me to sleep like more than 2 hours without waking up. And meditation, especially at night, is one of the most effective tools I really have encountered. So yeah, that's another very, very valuable skill set, I guess.
Yeah, that was another thing we used to do a lot in treatment. We would have like meditation sessions, and we would have like guided meditation or like solo meditation. I also did a lot of journaling when I was in treatment. So I remember I was at basically like a rehab for like a month, and we had one thing I really liked about treatment is that you have no phone, no access to internet for the entire time you're in treatment. So I was in like the woods of Illinois for a month with nothing. And I remember every night and every morning, I would just open up this notebook and I would write every thought. Like no coherence, no story, just writing down every single thought. And it's so good for regulation, actually. And I still do it to this day. So if I'm like hyperfixating on a situation, or if I'm like, I don't know, just having a hard time with my emotions, I open up a notebook, a random notebook, just jot down stuff. And for some reason, putting it on that paper, like putting it on a sheet of paper, like a physical item, really clears your mental.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No.
And it's not the same online.
No, it's not. It's really not. And also, Raven, something really important in what you mentioned was like the ability to disconnect from the internet and from social media, which is very
hard in this day and
difficult. And I really feel I can't overstate how difficult it is to do that. And that's actually something that I am still trying to figure out and really implement into my daily practices. But I feel like obviously it's been like very well documented that social media can be emotionally dysregulating and like lead to, I guess, difficulties with body image and with self-perception and all of that. But I also feel personally, like on an energetic level, when I gaze at anything, like when I make contact with anything, there is like an energy, this might sound very strange.
An energy transfer.
Yes, there's an energy transfer. Growing up, my mother would tell me to always have custody of my eyes, which is a phrase that sticks with me very much to this day, because I feel lots of people who have experienced trauma will like completely relate to this, but it's very, very, very difficult to unsee things. Like, I cannot underscore this enough, to the extent that we can, like being extremely deliberate with what we choose to physically gaze at, I think is extremely important. And one difficulty that personally I have with TikTok or Reels, particularly like content that is delivered in like 15-30 second format, is that it's very unpredictable. Like at one moment on TikTok, I could be looking at some wonderful video about acupuncture and the meridians and chakras, and then I'll scroll and I will see something like very visually disturbing that was completely like uncalled for in some respects.
I totally get that. Yeah, you scroll on TikTok and you're trying to look at these like silly little videos, and the next thing you know, you have like an alt-right woman-hating man talking about, you know, the only thing that you're worth is your body, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's so disrupting.
Yes.
And I think there's such little ability to regulate that with TikTok and with Reels. They just like push anything out to you to see what clicks.
Absolutely. And I completely, so for me personally, again, this is something I'm still trying to balance and work on in my own life. Generally, I am best off deleting my TikTok app, deleting my Instagram app, at least during periods of time in which I feel I have to recenter myself. It's very, for me personally, again, everyone is different, but for me personally, it's very, very difficult for me to ground myself spiritually and emotionally and have access to these types of apps. And I'm not saying that everyone must delete TikTok and must delete Instagram. Everyone has different capacities and tolerances. So what works for me, also not just like with respect to this particular piece of advice, but with respect to everything I'm saying, what works for me may not necessarily work for everyone else. And a huge part of any healing journey, in my own opinion, is approaching it from a perspective of experimenting. Exactly. So like what, for example, like I might listen to a particular meditation one night and not assign a huge amount of value to it, and just be like, I'm experimenting with this particular meditation technique tonight. If I like it, I like it. If I don't like it, then I never have to try it again.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So that honestly relates to a lot of mindset work that I've done on viewing things from a perspective of impermanence. Like anything that you experience is impermanent. This is just a fundamental
general life.
Exactly. This is just like a fundamental quality of reality that I've learned. Everything is impermanent. Buddhism has been very helpful for, like I said, I don't practice a particular religion, but I try to learn from many different spiritual practices. Buddhism has this concept called anicca, which I'm probably butchering, but it's the precept is just like that everything is passing, everything is impermanent, and this is really helpful for emotional regulation as well, I believe. Like anytime you experience an intense emotion, it will pass. Like it is completely transient.
Yeah. There's a saying in behavioral therapy, which is just to ride the wave. Ride the wave of emotions. Every emotion at its height feels like it will last forever.
It really does.
But it won't, you know? And when you look back at those feelings, you're like, oh, I just rode the wave. And so it helps to make those moments last a little shorter. That idea that everything sort of passes, everything is temporary, has helped me so much in life, because so many bad things happen just like on the regular. And you know, when things happen all at the same time, right, it feels like this summation of like badness, and you just feel like at this like peak of emotional dysregulation. But just remembering, like, sometimes life puts a bunch of bad things at the same time, but they will all pass. You know?
That's so true, Raven.
And time heals all wounds. That sounds like a very cheesy saying, but it really feels, it really is true.
I completely agree.
There are so many things I thought I would never be able to get over this, or I'll never stop feeling this feeling. But everything does pass eventually. You just have to work on it. You know?
That's true. That's true. In terms of your working on things, what's been helpful for you?
So, as I said a little bit earlier, the journaling really helped. Yeah, just getting those thoughts out there. I used to be a very huge overthinker. These days, I actually don't overthink that much. But, yeah, I used to be a huge overthinker, and really getting those thoughts out on paper helped me. I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks, or podcasts, or documentaries, so that I feel like I'm always learning something. I used to listen to this podcaster. Her name is Victoria Duvall. She has this podcast called Victoria's Secret, and she talked a lot about the idea of femininity. You know, I don't agree with everything she says, but I think a big part of it is she talks about mindfulness and protecting yourself and protecting your being. And I think that in this day and age, we want to push this idea of resiliency. Like, we are so resilient. We are able to go through hard things. The world is so hard. Everything is so hard. But I think we can make a conscious effort to do things to protect ourselves, do things to protect our souls, and do things to protect our energies. Another thing I do is I always have a non-yellow light on. So I always have like ambient lighting. And so right now, my room is purple and red, and those are like two colors I usually gravitate towards, are like really warm colors, and I think it just brings this like soothing energy to my space. I also use a lot of incense because I think that scent is a really, really powerful thing, and just trying to protect my space in general.
I also totally agree about like the qualities of scent, aromatherapy. Like, since the 4th century BC, ancient Greeks and other people across cultures really were like very highly attuned to the fact that there are healing properties of different scents and different tonics. And that was actually also another part of my journey, was like acquainting myself with the medicinal qualities that have been very well documented and very well studied, associated with different herbs, different scents. For example, lavender oil is an antiseptic.
Oh, that's awesome, yeah.
It's very, very effective in treating anxiety and treating sleeping issues. It soothes burning, and then sandalwood can treat coughs.
I love sandalwood.
Yeah, sandalwood is wonderful, honestly.
I also love eucalyptus.
Yes, I actually used to hang a eucalyptus plant
in
my shower. Yes, exactly.
I do aromatherapy showers like every day.
How do you do that? What do you use?
I have these like pucks of like scent. So right now I think I have like a pomegranate scent, but I also have like a eucalyptus one, a mint one, different ones for different purposes. And I think a practice of mine is to really treat those little things you have to do every day, those routines, treat them as a practice rather than like a robotic thing you just do every day. So I might have already taken a shower in a day, but if I feel like, you know, I just need to cleanse myself, like cleanse my soul, I'll do like an aromatherapy shower. I'll do a face mask. I'll really take my time applying the lotion, applying the body wash. You know, I'll be really gentle with myself. And I think bringing that mindfulness to those practices is a really easy way of, you know, healing yourself without having to take a lot of extra time to develop these new practices. Just trying to be more mindful in your daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so correct.
Like, it's really easy to become robotic.
Yes.
Especially if you're in academia, if you're in college. There's this idea of like, go, 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 go. Like, no one has time to do anything. Every meal is like eaten on the go. Every shower is super fast. But I think that can really disrupt your mental health without you even realizing it.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
I completely agree. And actually, one of my favorite spiritual teachers is named Eckhart Tolle, and he has a book called The Power of Now, which fundamentally changed my life, honestly. And I would say even cured a lot of my illnesses, like especially related to panic attacks and panic symptoms. But his idea is that suffering does not exist in the present moment. And when I say that, you might be like, well, it does. Like, what are you talking about? But Eckhart Tolle is saying that actually any type of suffering is the result of attachment to the past or the future. So one can be in pain in the present moment, right? But suffering consists of like this mental baggage that we attach to our own pain, and it's intensified when we're considering the past or the future. So for example, I could stub my toe, right? And I could simply kind of like what you were saying, Raven, I could let the urge, or not the urge really, but like the sensation pass. I could allow myself to surf this wave of pain. But if I attach a lot of valence to this feeling, like with regards to the past and future, if I'm like, oh my gosh, my toe's gonna hurt tomorrow, oh my gosh, I used to be so healthy, I didn't stub my toe, I was so much more careful with my space, right? Then I will like attach all of this unnecessary, painful, not even painful, but like sorrowful energy into my psyche, and this is very detrimental. So the more that we can ground ourselves in the here and now, and this also obviously like relates to what you were saying at the very beginning about grounding techniques. All of this is integrated. It all relates into one another. But yeah, definitely being aware of mindfulness in and of itself and incorporating mindfulness into practices throughout the day is really, really healing.
Funnily enough, I wrote a personal essay on pain versus suffering.
Really?
Because I wrote it a month ago. I was going through a lot at the time. It was like a lot of bad things came upon me all at the same time, and I was just completely overwhelmed. And I was trying to process, why am I feeling this so deeply? Because objectively, I had gone through harder things in life. And I think oftentimes I compare the pain that I'm experiencing in the moment to pain I've experienced in the past in order to justify my reaction, or in order to evaluate if my emotions are valid. So oftentimes, if I'm like, oh, I'm stressed out about work, but back in college, I used to go through so much more, I had to blah, blah, blah. And so I essentially am invalidating my own feelings. And so I wrote this personal essay on pain versus suffering. And I think my conclusion was the idea that suffering is the pain plus that worry about the
exactly.
What happened previously and what's going to happen in the future, and that suffering is sort of the culmination of a bunch of periods and so in order for me to be able to deal with situations in a better way, I have to address the pain as it comes and to do it without judgment of my future or my past. And I think that evaluation really helped me get through that time, because I can be extremely hard on myself and extremely judgmental, because I set all of these goals and I set all of these aspirations, and if I fall short in any way, shape, or form, then I start questioning my like value and my worth and whether or not I'm doing a good job. But if I just am like, okay, I feel insecure about this in the moment, what can I do about it? Or if I can't do anything about it, it's like, you're just a human, you make mistakes, you're just trying your best, then it doesn't turn into this whole complex of like me believing I am like worthless.
Probably the greatest mindset shift I ever had was to go from having a mindset of resistance to one of acceptance. And this is like extremely vague when I put it that way, but what it means is like anytime that I experience an obstacle in my life, now, this was not always the case, it took me many years to reach this point, but anytime I experience an obstacle, I recognize that this is the gift. The obstacle is the gift. This is like seared into my mind. Anytime that I experience a setback in my life now, I understand that it was designed for my own development and for my own growth. Before, I used to have a very, I don't want to say defeatist, but kind of like unhappy outlook that was really resistant of any type of suffering, any type of pain. I have come to understand that suffering is part of the human condition.
It is.
It really is. Like
that was a huge thing I had to accept, was that pain is inevitable. Suffering is inevitable. It's a part of living, and it's about how you deal with it. Every person experiences some sort of suffering suffering in one way or another. And you may not be able to see it, but a lot of people are suffering from internal struggles. You know what I mean?
That's so true. And it's really interesting because on a biological level, humans have a negative bias. So we're almost programmed to see issues, right? So this is very, like, neurologically, this is true. And also spiritually, many spiritual traditions teach that suffering is a component of the human condition. Like, Buddhism teaches this. Christianity teaches this. And I think that a really valuable skill, it's not even a skill, like a really valuable outlook to adopt is one that accepts suffering and learns not to resist it. Because the more that, in my experience, one resists suffering, the more intense the suffering becomes.
So
So truly allowing I guess in my own view, like how I would frame this with my own beliefs is like allowing myself to experience the unfolding of the divine plan and allowing myself to experience divinity and all its complexities, and which includes the obstacles that are kind of embedded in the human experience. Like, more practically, what that means is to simply observe challenges as they arise and try to, like, to the extent that I can, recognize the gift and recognize the lesson in everything that I'm facing.
Yes.
And it took me, I want to emphasize, it took me very, very many years.
And it's not easy at all.
It's not easy at all. I'm still working on it. Yeah.
Especially with those challenges that are super huge. Like, for example, my eating disorder or grief or, you know, experiencing like really big traumas. It's really hard to think, okay, like, I just have to take out the lesson. What you said is valuable, just sort of writing those emotions, like letting them come to you. You're not gonna all of a sudden have a positive outlook on every trauma that happens to you, obviously. You know what I mean?
Yes, and in my experience, like, I've almost never found the meaning or the gift in the suffering immediately. Like,
it's always after.
Exactly. I recognize the meaning and the value of the lesson after the pain is lessened.
But I think in the moment, what I try to do is just let the pain happen. And as you said, don't repress it, because I think then that makes it worse. Every time I've tried to suppress the pain, for example, through like moving on and trying not to think about it, or just giving myself a prescribed amount of time to deal with something and being like, I'm gonna move on. Or, you know, trying to invalidate myself, it always comes back to bite me in the ass.
Yeah, that's so true.
Because your body doesn't forget.
Right.
The body does not forget.
Exactly. And that's what, I mean, that's also why techniques like related to emotional freedom tapping and like vagus nerve exposure or like cold exposure for vagus nerve regulation are really valuable, because I feel that they release lots of the negative, like not just negativity, but pain that's stored in the body, and tension and stiffness. And to that effect, I feel like any practice that allows energy to be released from the body is so valuable.
So valuable.
And I mean, this is like very cliche, but exercise has a lot of healing properties, because it does. And I feel, I don't know, I would be interested to hear what you have to say about this, Raven, because exercise obviously is like very therapeutic, but then
it can also become very damaging.
If it's like practiced as a form of punishment, it can be like so scarring to the soul, not just to the body. So as with most things in life, I feel that finding balance is really critical and difficult.
It's strange. I feel like the body knows your intention with movement. I remember when I first started exercising I used to be on a dance team when I was in high school, and I always treated dancing as this like punishment. And as this way to regulate the way that I looked. And I hated dancing. Versus, this is very unrelated to being on a dance team, but I love going out and dancing. Like to a club or to a bar. And the reason I love it is because it's just a moment to be free, to feel the music and to just have fun. And I think because now I think of it as like, you know, I'm just expressing myself, and it's this like really fun thing, and I no longer have that judgment attached.
I also completely agree about what you're saying about exercise, and I think like the fundamental difference between the two approaches you're describing is that one of them views exercise as an ends and one views it as a means. So like means
that was amazing.
A means to a quote unquote more beautiful body, or means to like quote unquote whatever. But the other version of exercise that I think is actually the healing version of exercise is one that, like you were saying, incorporates all of these elements of mindfulness and celebration of the present moment and celebration of the body's capacities into its like practice. So I feel that that's really, really valuable, which also, like you were saying, ties in so beautifully to meditation in and of itself. Again, all of these ideas are related.
Yeah. I actually wanted to talk about how back when I was sick, I was very resistant to meditation.
Yes.
Very resistant to stillness.
Yes.
And I think if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, they're talking a bunch of mumbo jumbo, I could never sit for 15 minutes, 30 minutes and think about nothing. Like, I have these racing thoughts. Maybe try like the journaling first. And if you're like, well, journaling doesn't work for me, you know, try all, like, you know, give a couple of these options a try.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I think if you're super resistant to mindfulness, maybe think a little bit about why.
Absolutely.
Because mindfulness requires stillness.
This is so true. This is so, so true, Raven. I was actually telling my boyfriend last night that meditation is really difficult for me. Like, it is actually, for all of its therapeutic benefits, it is so difficult for me because I am one of the most self-critical creatures ever created. Like, by design. I am just, I've always been this way. I was like this as a child. I was like this as a teenager. I've been like this as an adult. But I'm retraining my mind to kind of... Because
you can.
Yes, you
can.
absolutely can. Neuroplasticity is like very...
So real.
Very
so
real. And very well documented. I feel like by design I'm very self-critical. And for that reason, and I also have dealt with a lot of anxiety and panic symptoms throughout my life. So for this reason, meditation kind of just like forces the self to sit with these feelings, which is very difficult. And a lot of people who begin meditation, and even people who sustain a practice of meditation, find it difficult because it is the practice of sitting with these intensified feelings. Like, these feelings may become more pronounced
in the moment,
in silence. Exactly. But I would really, really, like, one thing I wish someone had told me when I began meditating was not to discard the practice just because it's difficult. It is difficult. It can be very difficult, but it also kind of is accompanied by these really, really profound healing benefits when practiced over time. So if you meditate for like 5-10 minutes and don't feel quote unquote better immediately, do not lose faith.
Yeah, just keep it going. Keep it going.
Which is so much easier said than done. But yes, I also agree. We have like a cultural aversion to stillness, which is something I'm trying to unlearn. One of my other favorite spiritual leaders is, or I don't even know if he's a leader, he's like a thinker. David Hawkins has this incredibly wonderful book called Letting Go, which is about surrender and about the really transformative power of accepting one situation rather than fighting like whatever is in reality. But I bring this up because he theorizes that a lot of addictions are the result of an inability to face the present moment. So very often when alcoholics or binge eaters, I don't even like those terms because like I don't like to label people. I guess when people who struggle with alcohol have sustained trouble with alcohol, often because the alcohol like silences or mutes out whatever internal struggle is taking place in the mind. And in the absence of alcohol, when there's like complete stillness, this person must completely confront whatever, as I was saying, whatever pain is occurring like within the head. So learning to really tame the thoughts in stillness is so fundamentally powerful because it can really have this transformative effect in terms of healing other illnesses and addictions. Yeah, stillness is key.
I have this friend, and basically he's one of the most mindful people I've ever met. He will go like days without a phone. He will go days without checking anything. And I was like talking to him, and he was like, yeah, I just go on walks and I listen to nothing and I just walk around. And I thought to myself, when was the last time I just walked with nothing in my ears? Like no podcast, no YouTube, no spot, nothing. Like, I would just go on walks. I would go on my bus ride to work without anything, and I would just look at people. I would just look around. It was around the summertime, and I walked outside, and there was a jazz festival going on in the park next to me. And I don't think I would have... And I just walked outside, and I just sat and just listened to the music. And that feeling was so incredibly healing. And I don't think I ever would have experienced that if I wasn't taking the conscious time to really feel every bit of the emotion, like every bit of the experience. Because even if you're on social media and you're not seeing anything that's damaging, it's dampening the in-life experiences that you're having. Mm-hmm. It puts you on autopilot, and you're just less observant of everything going on around you. I remember like sitting in the park on a bench and looking around and feeling the breeze and like the sunset, and it was just such a beautiful scene, and I could really and truly appreciate that moment.
Something I think of very, very frequently is like the microscopic and macroscopic elements of life. Life has so much beauty and complexity contained within it on both of these levels. I was walking in nature and I was looking at a tree. This is in January, and this might sound kind of strange, but I was really silently analyzing the leaves on the tree, and it struck me in that moment of mindfulness that the configuration of the leaves and the branches on the tree reminded me so much of the circulatory system in the human body. Mm-hmm. And I was recognizing just this pattern in design between all of these like small and large elements of creation. Mm-hmm. And as I said at the beginning, that really reinforces my own personal belief in there being an intelligent, benevolent designer, creator of the universe, which underpins my self-love practice, right? Like, I have struggled with body image for a very long time, and one of the only reminders that really helps me consistently is this notion that everything is created in the image of God, and therefore there is no ugly person. Mm-hmm. There is no ugly person.
Real.
Because we're all made in the image of something greater than ourselves. Mm-hmm. And as I said, everyone's journey will be different, and like the reminders that are effective for me may or may not be helpful for others. But yeah, I think honestly developing like a set of core beliefs and really not just like being cognizant of them, but being completely aware, like saturated with them at all times. For a while, my lock screen was like a series of beliefs that I had about myself and about the universe. And this was actually very, very helpful and helped me shift my self-worth away from anything physical or any accomplishments related to academics, which I think is pretty difficult as a college student. Like, this is something I still struggle with. For me, assigning my worth to my status as a creation of God rather than as like someone who looked a certain way or someone who accomplished XYZ tasks in a given amount of time was really, really valuable also.
I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with a friend, and she's Hindu, and we were talking about Hinduism, and she was talking about sort of the way her parents, instilled in her the religion, which is the idea that our only mission in life is to become a better version of ourselves, to consistently work towards becoming a better, more self-actualized, kinder, a more helping version of ourselves. And I think that really helped take away a lot of the judgment I had of myself. I'm not particularly religious. I would consider myself more agnostic. But I was raised Catholic, which sort of has this underpinning of like, you are a bad person and like everything you do is a sin and blah, blah, blah. And like the whole idea of repentance, blah, blah, blah. So I left the church quite a while ago. But like hearing her speak about religion in such a warm and inviting and non-judgmental and growth-focused way really made me feel like I can be kinder to myself. I am not the sum of my accomplishments, my external accomplishments. My goal is to live by my values and to consistently try to grow and to reflect kindness and to reflect good energy. And I think one of my top goals in life is to become a person who lights up a room, or a person who reflects kindness and who reflects empathy and who, you know, all of those things. And I think that's like one of my top goals. Before, it was like, oh, I want to go to a top 10.
So real.
You know? But I think I can still accomplish that, you know what I mean? But I think the focus was a little misaligned or something.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And for the record, and I hope everyone hears this too, when I first met Raven, she was lighting up a room. Like, this is how I first noticed her. I met her at a dinner party, and everyone was kind of seated, and I think our food had arrived and whatnot. And then Raven walks in, and I am literally not exaggerating, everyone at the table smiled. Like, everyone was like, Raven's here, it's Raven. No, I think you really
that
are.
makes me want to cry.
No,
that's so sweet.
It's just genuine. And I think that I love what you're saying about, like, realigning our worth to be in accordance with, like, broader ideas of, I don't know if I want to say ethics, but kindness, love, integrity, empathy. And I think also, like, tapping into what you were saying about school and accomplishments and such, I think that it's so, like, these two things are so compatible. It's really, really, really feasible to invest in oneself spiritually and emotionally and academically. And
So
I'm not
true.
saying that it will be easy to like,
It's
pursue
so
all these things
hard.
at once, but they're not mutually exclusive.
They are
And
not.
one of my self-care practices that I totally forgot to mention is habit tracking. So for about a year, I've created, so I am, like, very, very obsessed with enumeration. This is just how my mind works. Like, left to my own devices, my thoughts will, like, enumerate various pieces of evidence and, like, weigh them against each other. And I was like, okay, how can I leverage this to my advantage? So I have an Excel spreadsheet that enumerates different habits. So I think currently it's, like, hours slept the night previously, minutes spent reading for pleasure, minutes spent meditating, yes or no, did I move my body in some, like, meaningful way. And I've been tracking these habits. Also, I've, like, added and subtracted various habits over time from the spreadsheet because, as I said, many things are dynamic, and I try to approach, like, these practices from a mindset of impermanence and such. But this has been so valuable to me, first of all, because it has been scientifically documented that habits that are recorded will change over time. Like, you will be more likely to sleep longer or, like, commit to a consistent sleep schedule if you document it as opposed to if you do not. Second of all, I grew so much in self-efficacy when I saw the power
you know
that I
you
had
can do it.
Exactly, to modify my own behavior. This was one thing I could control, and that I did control, and it was really valuable in, like, improving my own view of myself. So that's also very, very related to self-care, I feel. Yeah.
No, that's... I relate so much to everything you're saying. I also have the habit of enumeration, and I used to bullet journal, and I used to habit track everything that I did. And actually, I was on TikTok the other day, and I ran into this post, and it said, a checklist to work out why I currently feel like shit in the past week.
Let's hear it. Okay.
And so it says, have I worked out? Have I done something completely self-care focused? Have I been outside for the purpose of work? Have I worked unexpectedly late in the last 2 days? Have there been things out of my control that have gone wrong? Have I seen my friends? Am I in my luteal phase, which is really important? Have I been on social media a lot? Or do I now realize that I actually don't hate my life? And I think it's crazy. I saw that and I immediately was like, I need this. I immediately need this checklist, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in your thoughts, to so easily get wrapped up in everything going on in your life, and then a little bit later be like, why am I feeling like this? Like, why? But I think if you habit track, and if you're, documenting these things, and if you have a way of an objective way of evaluating why you're going through things, it's a lot easier to work through it. And you're like, oh, I realize, like, I am deficient in this part of my life. Let me address it. Versus going through things and not really have any method of, like, tracking it or documenting it. So I love that idea of, like, habit tracking, and it works. It really works.
Absolutely, Raven. That's so true. And it's also, like you were saying, it's really interesting for me to analyze retrospectively, periods of time in the past year when I've been feeling very bad or very anxious.
There are always trends.
Yes, there are always trends. Like, life is nothing but a series of patterns. And I feel like as I said, I'm very prone to overthinking, to having enumerative, obsessive thoughts. And as I mentioned earlier, I was like, how can I leverage this to my advantage? So I would use these thoughts to, like, analyze patterns in why I was feeling certain ways during certain periods of time, because anytime that you track your habits and emotions and, like, the correspondence between the two, this is data. Like, you can identify patterns in the data and use those to try to improve your mood and your situation. So yeah, that's totally valuable. And the last thing I totally forgot to mention was about attention. And this is, like, kind of related to custody of the eyes and, like, really being intentional with where one places one's energy. But Marcus Aurelius and a lot of the Stoics, like, in Greek history, had this belief that I completely agree with, that one cannot control external events, but one can control one's mind and one can control one's attention. And this is so, in my experience, just, like, correct, first of all, and also something that can really be integrated into everyday application. So what I mean by this is that I try to direct my attention into things that I feel will benefit my mind in the long run. So last year I set a goal to read the works of every Nobel Prize literature winner since, like, 1920. I have not completed this. This will take, like, quite some time.
You're like, actually, I did it 5 days ago.
I would never. But yeah, that was, like, in this process, I've directed a lot of my energy, not even my energy, but my thoughts, like, on a very practical level, away from some of my more self-destructive thoughts or, like, extremely harmful obsessive thoughts, and into these authors. Like, for example, Ishiguro is one author that I've encountered through this that I love. Andre Gide, Saramago, like, introducing myself to these authors and their works of literature not only, like, supported this mini project in my mind, but it, like, on a really practical level rerouted me, you know, away from certain thoughts. And an additional practice I do is gratitude listing. So like I said, very enumerative mind. So I was like, how can I, like, reframe this trend of enumeration to, like, maybe support something more life-affirming and more positive. So I don't do this every day, and I really want to do it more, and I'm going to try to do it more, but, like, maybe once every 2 weeks, I will just, for 30 minutes, list out blessings in my life that I'm grateful for, which is, again, a redirection of my attention to things that are more uplifting. So, like, the other day I was writing down, I'm just very lucky. Like, I have wonderful friends. I have the best boyfriend ever. He's very kind. He appreciates me for who I am. He's so smart. I learn from him. I go outside. I have the ability to move my legs. I have a sense of scent. I have, like, as I'm able to hear. I can see color. Like, the blessings are endless once they begin to, like, be listed. So that's another thing that I try to do to redirect my attention. For every individual, what is healing may not necessarily transfer to the next person, but it's still valuable to hear everyone's experiences, because, like, any given listener might hear some of what I've practice and some of what Raven has practiced, and, like, try to incorporate different experiment. This is, if you take one word away, I would say it should be experiment, because what works for you may change with time and may be adaptable to your circumstance, and you're not tied to anything. Like, just because you bullet journal once doesn't mean you have to stick with it. Just because you light a candle, absolutely. Just because you light a candle of a certain scent once doesn't mean that you have to do this at the same time the next day, right? Everything, there is a season for everything under heaven. There is a time for everything. So allowing flexibility with yourself and your routine is so important. And learning from what other people have practiced, and learning from what you yourself have practiced and what you yourself know to be useful is really, really magical, honestly. Yeah.
And guys, Zandi is such a mindful, like her essence is so mindful. Like you can, when you meet her, you can tell she is a very, like she practices what she preaches. And yeah, I love all of the things she's suggested, and a lot of them I've never thought of before, like listening to certain frequencies or setting like a huge challenge, like I want to read every book since 1920. I think it's like, ugh, it's amazing. It's amazing.
And I've learned from you as well. Like I might think about bullet journaling now. It's not something I've done before.
Yeah, it's so fun. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Yeah. Everyone listening, get your variety pack of coping mechanisms and try them out from this episode. And we'll see you next week.